Tolkien's Ringwraiths are among the most iconic villains in The Lord of the Rings, but although the Nazgul's black cloaks and breathless voices will strike fear into any fantasy fan, not everybody knows their whole story. This is the whole story behind the Ringwraiths from The Lord of the Rings. There's a good chance you've heard these creatures called a number of different names, and true enough, they've got more titles than you can shake a Morgul blade at. Sauron's most dreadful servants go by several different names throughout The Lord of the Rings, including, among others, the Nazgul, the Ringwraiths, the Black Riders, the Nine, the Fell Riders, the Ulayri, and the Nine Servants. One orc in The Return of the King even refers to them as filthy shriekers. But while the group as a whole are called many things, the names of the individual Ringwraiths themselves have always been shrouded in mystery. The leader of the Nine is commonly referred to by his titles. The Lord of Morgul, Lord of the Nazgul, and the Witch King are most common, but even he isn't named. The only Nazgul to ever be directly named in Tolkien's writings is Khamûl. In the Index of Unfinished Tales, Tolkien succinctly describes Khamûl as second to the Chief, Shadow of the East, and the Black Easterling, giving a tiny sliver of personality to at least one of his Ringwraiths. Unsurprisingly, the Ringwraiths are old, almost unspeakably old in fact. By the time of The Lord of the Rings, the Nazgul, despite originally being mortal men, are probably pushing 5,000 years of age. Their inception likely dates back to roughly halfway through the Second Age, right after Sauron created the One Ring. Each of the Nazgul receives a ring of power around this time, which unnaturally extends their lives. Over the next few thousand years, the Nazgul gradually begin to lose their physical form. In the Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf explains to Frodo why this happens, saying that a mortal Frodo who keeps one of the great rings does not die, but he does not grow or obtain more life. He merely continues, until at last every minute is a weariness. Gandalf adds, "And if he often uses the ring to make himself invisible, he fades. He becomes in the end invisible permanently and walks in the twilight under the eye of the dark power that rules the rings." This is exactly what happened to the Nazgul. Each of their rings gradually whittled away their humanity until they became little more than ghostly slaves to the whims of the Dark Lord. Their fated existence means that Ringwraiths don't take up much physical space in the real world. Sure, they can wear clothes, wield weapons, and ride horses, but their primary existence is spiritual in nature. In essence, they dwell in an unseen shadow realm through which they can dimly interact with the real world. This natural state in which the Nazgul inhabit can often affect the people who encounter them. For instance, when Frodo puts on the ring, he too enters that spiritual dimension and is able to see the Ringwraiths and all of their otherworldly horror. When Merry and Éowyn stab the Witch King in battle, both of their arms immediately go cold and numb. Their weapons also disintegrate, with Merry's burning like a piece of wood and Éowyn's breaking into splinters. In the Fellowship of the Ring, Tolkien even implies that characters like Gandalf, Aragorn, and Glorfindel are uniquely suited to resist the Riders, not because of any physical prowess, but because of their resilience against the effects of the spiritual realm. With one foot in the physical world and one on the other side, the Ringwraiths end up using a range of different weapons to carry out their dirty work. Some of these are pretty simple, such as their swords or the Witch King's giant black mace. But the weapons of the Nazgul can be far deadlier and more terrifying. In the novel version of The Return of the King, the Witch King uses a black dart to kill Theoden's horse, and Aragorn later suggests that their darts can kill much faster than the average arrow. And then there's the Morgul knife that the Witch King uses to stab Frodo on Weathertop. A notch of the cursed blade embeds itself into the Hobbit's shoulder while the rest of the weapon disintegrates. The splinter then begins to worm its way toward Frodo's heart, only being stopped by the timely intervention of Elrond's healing arts. If it had struck home, though, it would have turned Frodo into a wraith under their command. The effect of the Morgul blade is so terrible, in fact, that Frodo becomes ill on every anniversary of his stabbing, long after the Nazgul are destroyed.
It's been 4 years to the day since Weathertop, Sam. It's never really healed.
As terrible as the blades and arrows of the Nazgul may be, they're nothing compared to the Riders' unearthly weapons. While the exact details remain largely unexplained in Tolkien's writings, the Ringwraiths wield a number of mind-melting preternatural weapons that they regularly employ against their enemies. Abject fear is one of those weapons, and the Nazgul are able to wield fear to great effect, striking pure dread into their foes even from a great distance. In The Return of the King, during the Siege of Gondor, the Riders fly high over Minas Tirith, shrieking and terrifying all below. Tolkien writes, "At length, even the stout-hearted would fling themselves to the ground as the hidden menace passed over them. Or they would stand, letting their weapons fall from nerveless hands, while into their minds a blackness came, and they thought no more of war, but only of hiding and of crawling and of death." Then there's the Black Breath. In the Fellowship of the Ring, Merry first encounters this phenomenon during his visit to Bree, when he runs into a Nazgul and almost immediately passes out. Later, during The Return of the King, the Black Breath is connected to a strange sickness called the Black Shadow. According to the novel, Those who are stricken with it fell slowly into an ever deeper dream, and then passed to silence and a deadly cold, and so died. So just how did the Nazgul come to be? Well, their origin lies back in the Second Age, long before the events of The Lord of the Rings. At this time, Sauron forges the Rings of Power, including his One Ring. After failing to enslave the elves with his rings, the Dark Lord redistributes them to the other races of Middle-earth. 9, of course, go to the Great Lords of Men. While he never explains who all of the 9 riders are or where each one comes from, in the Silmarillion, Tolkien reveals that of the 9, 3 were Great Lords of the Númenórean race. Númenor was the incredibly powerful island nation that frequently came to blows with Sauron during the Second Age, and it's where Aragorn's ancestors hail from too. After they're given their rings, the 9 become mighty and are soon known as great kings, sorcerers, and warriors. They're bathed in glory, and of course, they also become incredibly rich. As time begins to creep by, however, they begin to succumb to the long-term effects of the Rings of Power. The Nazgul first make an appearance around the year 2251 of the Second Age, roughly 600 years after the forging of the One Ring. Very little detail is given about their activity at this time, but they likely spend the next millennium helping Sauron conquer most of Middle-earth. Eventually, their great master tussles with the Númenóreans, which eventually leads to the destruction of Númenor and the establishment of the new nations of Arnor and Gondor. From there, the action picks up again, ending in the War of the Last Alliance, in which Sauron is defeated and the One Ring passes to Isildur. After his defeat at the end of the Second Age, Sauron is left unable to take on a physical form. This leads to a general peaceful period in Middle-earth's history, and as the Third Age kicks off, the Nazgul fade into the shadows. Over time, however, the shapeless Sauron once again begins to stir, using his most fearful servants as his prime movers and shakers. Even so, it takes some time to get things going again. Around 1,000 years into the Third Age, the 5 wizards first arrive in Middle-earth with the express task of assisting the people of Middle-earth in their struggles against Sauron. The Dark Lord himself secretly reappears around this time too, setting up the stronghold of Dol Guldur in Mirkwood. The Ringwraiths are almost certainly around at this point too. For a while, the White Council even believes that the evil presence in Dol Guldur could be one of the Nazgul. Of course, they couldn't be more wrong. A few hundred years after Sauron's reappearance, the Nazgul officially make their return. The Witch King then establishes the kingdom of Angmar in the northern regions of Middle-earth. While his master slowly rebuilds his strength, the greatest of the 9 wages a centuries-long war with the kingdom of Arnor. Eventually, the Witch King is defeated, but Arnor is destroyed in the process. Then, just 6 years later, the Witch King reappears in the uninhabited wastelands of Mordor and gathers his 8 fellow wraiths. 20 years later, they attack the Gondorian city of Minas Ithil and capture it, renaming it Minas Morgul and making it their home.
This is my power.
The Nazgul spend the next millennia preparing Mordor for their master's return. They also slowly chip away at the strength of his enemies, especially Gondor, where they kill the king by luring him into single combat, leaving the stewards to rule the kingdom until another king should return. Many years later, the White Council finally attacks Dol Guldur and drives Sauron out of his stronghold. He then makes his long-awaited return to Mordor, where he and the 9 prepare for war. After Sauron's return to Mordor, 3 of the Ringwraiths are sent back to Dol Guldur to hold it while their master is away, one of whom is named Khamûl the Easterling. Meanwhile, a messenger from Mordor arrives at the Lonely Mountain. In the Fellowship of the Ring, he's described as a horseman in the night whose breath came like the hiss of snakes, clearly suggesting that he was one of the Nazgul. This rider brings a message of friendship from Sauron and offers the dwarves their own rings of power. The dwarves refuse to listen, but the messenger returns more than once, hoping to win them over to the Dark Lord's side. Around this time, Sauron captures Gollum and tortures him into revealing the location of the One Ring. The Dark Lord then unleashes his 9 riders in the so-called Hunt for the Ring. The Ring-Bearer makes a very lucky escape at this point, since the wraith known as Khamûl arrives at Bag End just after Frodo and his companions have left. The Ringwraiths play a significant role in the War of the Ring. The 9 hunt the hobbits on the road to Rivendell and nearly recapture the One Ring on a number of occasions. They later reappear acting as messengers and generals for Sauron and wreak absolute havoc in the war against Gondor. Soon enough, however, the first of the 9 is killed when Éowyn and Merry defeat the Witch King during the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. Later, as the armies of the West assault the Black Gate of Mordor, the 8 remaining Ringwraiths gather one last time. They're given their final task when Sauron orders them to hurtle towards Mount Doom to stop Frodo from destroying the One Ring, but they arrive too late. In The Return of the King, their final moments are described in fiery detail. Tolkien writes, "The Nazgul came shooting like flaming bolts, as caught in the fiery ruin of hill and sky they crackled, withered, and went out." And so comes the end of Sauron's greatest servants. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.